Hello and welcome to Shattered Lives. It's been quite an extraordinary week. I suppose there really is only one major story in town, and it has been in many ways, a dark couple of days out in Coolock. So I'm joined as always by Mick. My name is Paul Healy, and we're here to discuss the crime stories of the day. How's it going, Mick?
Yeah, a bit tired after I had 8 hours on my feet up in Culock yesterday. We were recording this on Wednesday afternoon. So
Mm.
I'm pretty tired, I'll be honest with you. It's hard. It was hard work. Anyway, nobody wants to hear that.
No, that's your job, I suppose, in one
She's
sense.
okay, Roy Keane, no problem.
Yeah, I look. I mean, jokes aside, I suppose it's been a difficult couple of days, and just
Mm.
as a as a dub, I'm embarrassed really for our city. I have had the same sensation that I had, feelings I had when the Dublin riots occurred. This incident out in Coolock was horrendous. Now, I want to say off the bat, and I'm sure that you'll probably agree with me, having been out there, Mick, especially, lots of good and decent people out in Coolock, and people are entitled to protest and have their views. You might not agree with them, but we have peaceful protests in this country. And at times in Coolock, there was peaceful, genuine protest from people who had no ill will, no intention of causing violence. But it's a cohort of people, serious thugs. Some of them have connections to gangland. And some of them are just, I suppose, what you would label the far right, and people who have co opted a certain movement and caused absolute mayhem there over the last couple of days.
We can only report what we see. And as I said,
Yeah.
I was there yesterday. And
Mm.
I'm not going to say there was a carnival atmosphere, but and look, I've spoken about this before, Paul, privately. I used to cover riots up north. I mean, it's not my first rodeo. I started
Yeah.
off as a young journalist in Belfast, late 1994, so the ceasefire happened at the end of August 1994. And after that, one of the things that really, really emerged was loyalist protest marches through Catholic areas and the stuff there. So I did plenty of Drumcrees, I did Lower
Mm.
Ormo, heavy shit. There were times
Mm.
when I really, really worried for my life. I have to say, we were surrounded by, I was going to say, by our loyalists, right? And it
Mm.
was
Mm.
heavy, heavy shit.
Mm.
I was at Coolock yesterday, and people might not want to hear this, but we can only report what we see. And I know it was bad on the first night; it was Monday, wasn't it? But yesterday it
Mm.
was grand. Look, I was there from 1 o'clock to 9 o'clock. Saw all the heavy stuff from about 8:30 on, 8:15 on.
Mm.
The atmosphere. It wasn't a carnival atmosphere, but it was grand. I at no
Mm.
stage did I feel under threat. At no stage did I get attacked physically or verbally. And there were other journalists there, Conor Lally, a couple of RT heads there. Now, we weren't, we didn't have bibs on going, I'm with the Star and I'm with the Mirror. We kept a low enough profile, but we were
Mm.
standing beside
Mm.
protesters. We were
Mm.
standing at the railings
Mm.
across from where the main protest was. I didn't get any grief. Now, some people found that unpalatable, and some buckethead called me a far right sympathizer for saying that. I can only
Mm.
see what I see, right?
Mm.
And if people don't want to hear it, that's grand. But facts are friendly.
No, that feeds into what I'm saying. That I think there were a lot of good people who I might not share their opinion, but they're entitled to protest, and I think you saw a bit of that yesterday. People who were protesting. It was obviously much more peaceful, but I suppose putting that into context, there was mayhem the day before,
Yeah, yeah.
and
I know.
it was only because of a serious policing operation and the arrest and very sudden charge of over 15 people. I think, the actions of the Gardaí, I think, caused people to think twice about causing ruptions the next day.
There was serious violence on the Monday night. I'm not
Yeah.
gainsaying that. I'm not denying it. We all saw it. And I know another journalist, I won't say who he is because he works for another paper, but he said he felt quite at risk on the
Yeah.
Monday and he was repeatedly accused of being an undercover Garda.
Yeah.
So,
Well,
that's his reality because that's what happened there.
Well, I'll be honest. I mean, look, I covered it on Monday.
Mm,
I followed the events, and I did make a judgment call to. I didn't go into the center of it at all, and that is because I felt I wouldn't be safe. People might judge me for that and say you're a journalist, should be on the front line. There's times when you just don't put yourself willingly into the front line. I covered it as best I could. I followed the day's events. I spoke to several sources and people involved, and obviously, also, like everybody else, I was watching a lot of live streams because a lot
mm.
of these people who were involved in these protests were live streaming the entire thing. So they were probably getting better footage than I would have got anyway. I probably would have just got pepper sprayed like the rest of the people.
I,
But it was a horrendous shit show, really,
it
and
was.
it just escalated in particular in the afternoon. Um, and thankfully, as I said again, to the actions of the of Garda Síochána, it was eventually put order was restored.
So there was significant violence. I was watching it. There was significant violence on Monday, and there was significant violence. We know this on the 23rd of November last year. Horrific
Mm,
violence. So, I'm not trying to say that you know this thing didn't exist. I can only tell you what I saw, and I was with
yeah.
other journalists, and we were all really remarking on the same thing. And even one of the journalists who was there on the Monday, I was with him yesterday, and he was saying he didn't really feel at risk when it was happening, and they sort of left us alone, and the photographers there, and he said they didn't get away. So look, it is what it is. I'm
Mm,
just saying, Jesus.
mm.
Anyway,
Well, I think we're talking about a handful of people that caused serious trouble,
mm,
and those people don't care for Gardaí, they don't like the government, and they don't like the media. And I did see some of our colleagues getting a good bit of abuse on the Monday. Now I'm talking about
mm,
photographers who were just trying to take photos of the action and were told they weren't welcome there. People giving them abuse. Now, thankfully, nobody was attacked, but
yeah,
we did see scenes of protesters, if we can call them that. There were legitimate protesters, but there were people, thugs really, who were throwing fireworks, throwing bricks, and as we've subsequently found out, petrol bombs at members of Garda Síochána. And as the Taoiseach said, and I do agree with him on this, you're not a protester. The second you're throwing a petrol bomb, you are just a thug. You're committing a crime.
absolutely. And the guards found it very, very difficult. We
Yeah.
can talk about this. The guards found it very difficult. It was a very, very dangerous situation. The only incident I had on the night was on Tuesday yesterday. Was I walked in, and I sort of, when you get into these things, I sort of you try and keep be passive. Somebody looks at you, you don't engage with them, you just keep walking, right? So I was
Yeah.
filming, and somebody said, "Oh, there's a bollocks over there filming." Grand, no problem. As somebody else said, "There's nothing wrong with being a coward," so I put down the camera. Grand, live the fed another day, right? But then somebody was giving me the eye, and I went, "Oh fuck, here we go." An older fella, right? And when it all kicked off, he came up to me again, right? And I go, "Here we go." And all he said was, "I like your pod. It's very informative. You and that young Healy fella." So, people are people. That's the only interaction I had. Apart from there was an egg. We were standing, an egg landed halfway
Mm.
between us and a Garda van. So, of course, the journalist I was with went, "What egg?" Ah, so I could see the egg, and you could see where it was coming. It came from the protesters. I think they were
Mm.
throwing it at the guards, and their miss was
Mm.
bad, and they nearly got us. But that was it.
Well, I'm glad he was listening. Was he involved in the protest? Probably was. Yeah.
No, he was. No, I think he was more observant. I think a
Okay.
lot of people did go to observe, and one of the hacks I
Hmm.
was with, who was there the night before, he did make a point that when it hit the fan, a lot of the observers went, "Fuck this for Game of Darts," and skedoodled. So
Yeah.
I think this fella was an observer, but he's got good
We
taste in
should.
pods anyway.
He does. He does. We should just talk about the events of Monday, and I'll just
Mm,
kind of go through it, I suppose, semi chronologically, because we were first getting texts early in the morning that things were kicking off. And it didn't take long before there was video footage. Nowadays, there's video footage before we can even get there. Um, so yeah, just in case anyone hasn't been following this, it is a encampment that has been there for the last number of weeks, and it's a protest called Culock Says No that was encamped there. So it's the former Crown Paints factory, and it's no longer that, but it is going to be used. for asylum seekers, and this Culock says no is effectively an anti-asylum seeker protest. But on the early hours of Monday morning, we understand that Gardaí assisted workers onto the site, so working material, building material brought onto the site, and a JCB digger among them. And everything appeared to go quite swimmingly. And as we have now subsequently found out and reported, there were members of the public order unit, the Garda public order unit, who were present to assist in getting workers onto the site. So certainly there was, we didn't know this first thing in the morning on Monday, but the Gardaí had, I suppose the foresight to see that there could potentially have been an issue there. There could have been ruptions over there. Moving people onto the site and getting rid of the encampment that was there for the last number of weeks. But there was no incident. So our understanding is members of the public order unit that were there, a very small number of them, left the scene. We then had a handful of Gardaí, really. I estimated about 9 members of Garda Síochána, only 2 of which were community police members, left at the scene. And it was only then, when those poor, unfortunate members were there initially, that the shit started to really hit the fan.
Let me ask something. Do you think that the guards, to use an analogy, were prepared for the war, but weren't prepared for the peace? In other words, when they cleared the camp, they thought it was game over and there wouldn't be any trouble.
Yeah, I definitely get that sense. I mean, as I said, the members of the public order unit that were there were ordered to leave. So, look, we're not privy to policing plans. I could guess that, the thought process was, don't have them there any longer than you need them, and try and keep it all peaceful. And, they're trying to facilitate peaceful protests. And that's something I've heard Drew Harris even say since, and politicians are saying people are entitled to peaceful protests. So, yeah, they scaled it right back, I suppose, in the hope that it wouldn't escalate. But at least when they were initially there, they were there thinking that there could be trouble. They obviously assessed that there wasn't trouble. However, about 9, 10, 11 o'clock, it sparked off, and you had, I wouldn't call these people protesters again. You had thugs, and you saw the video of them. They're all very young. They're wearing their balaclava. They're completely covered up. They gained access to the site, so they broke down the fencing. They came in, and they just began setting fire to anything they could set fire to, eventually setting fire to the digger that was there.
And the beds, I think the beds were setting fire. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's obviously when those small number of Gardaí that were left were in serious trouble. And as we've now learned, those members were fearing for their safety and were left in a very precarious position, because obviously earlier they had, I suppose, the assurance of public order support. They did not have that. They did not have that then. So my understanding is, and you've obviously heard it yourself, Mick, that there was an alert set out basically to get any member of Garda Síochána that was within the vicinity and patrol cars to the area as soon as possible to assist.
Well, I wouldn't say it's an alert. I'd say it's more of an appeal. The same thing happened. Yeah. The same thing happened on the 23rd of November. Remember, you were at the GRA, and weren't you interviewing some GRA members from, I'm going to say Leinster, who got the appeal, and en masse, 5 or 6 of them get into a Garda van and just headed to Dublin.
Yes.
Kildare, was it Kildare?
It was members from Kildare,
right,
who were drafted up to the Dublin riots, and they basically just got a text and got in the car and went, got in the van and went. So
the same thing happened here. And now, just to explain something about the public order unit, the public order unit is really ad hoc. Okay, so if you see them, say, at Lansdowne Road or Croker, the Garda bosses, whatever, I think Angie Willis, the commissioner, or maybe a chief for that division, Jerry McMenamin, Paddy McMenamin, say in the North Central, if it's Croker, will say, right, I anticipate we're going to need the public order unit, so they're going to be drafted in, but they're ordinary members. There's no devoted public order unit per se. In other words, members have to be taken off the regular, or there are detectives who are in the public order unit. So the same thing happened here. You have to gather together a public order unit. You don't summon the public order unit. You summon guards who are public order trained, and then a public order unit is created for this incident. And that's what happened here.
Yeah, but to be clear, they were also just ordinary members from Garda Síochána who were getting there,
Yeah,
whether they were
to get
public
there.
order or
Mhm.
not. They were just trying to get them there. Now, look, I wasn't on the ground, but my understanding is that some members who were on the ground were incredibly frustrated because they were told that there would be no one available for public order for a very long period of time. And I think they were given a time of 2 p.m. initially.
Yeah,
Now, that obviously changed because the situation was fluid, and very senior members of Garda Síochána made, serious calls to get as many units as they could there as possible. And even the Garda Commissioner got himself to Culock Garda Station quite early on, when things unfolded. So those frustrated members, they were left asking for a period, I was told, of over 5 hours, because it eventually members of the public order unit obviously arrived in their droves. There were up to 6 vans that we saw, public order members from all over the country, really anyone that could get there, arrived just after 12 o'clock. And that's really when, I suppose, the rioting, if you could call it that, began.
yeah. So they're called, in public order speak, they're called serials, and I can't remember, but it's either 2 vans or 3 is a serial,
Yeah.
or a team. So it's about 20. So there were a couple of serials there. It's an inspector, a sergeant, a couple of sergeants and guards. But oh yeah, I mean, once they got there, they were there in significant numbers. But there was a significant period when they weren't there. The public order unit is important because they're what you call a force multiplier. If you see 5 guards, dressed in normal gear, the crowd might go, okay, right, we've got them. But if you see 5 or 6 public order unit guards with the helmets, the overalls, the body armor, the shields, the long baton, it does toughen coughs, and that's why they're really, really important. Plus, they're trained in what to do.
It does, and from what I saw, at least initially, that did calm things. Okay, they were standing there, but I think members of Garda Síochána who are not public order were actually standing in front at first. Yeah. So there was an unwillingness. I don't know. It's part of their training, I guess, to initially engage. They were trying again to facilitate some sort of peaceful protest, and there was for a short period of time that we saw people with a megaphone being passed around, and they were saying whatever they wanted into it. And there were people, I saw women there with strollers, So, I mean, ordinary members of the public were there. But once again, thuggery won the day, I suppose, and things escalated. They got violent. Members of the public order unit had to engage. And, we saw plenty of video footage. It's interesting watching because they obviously form a line, and then there is a call and they move forward, and they move forward with the shields. And eventually, sadly, unfortunately, in some cases, had to use pepper spray on some individuals who were getting a little bit too close for comfort. It's not nice to have to see that. It's horrific to have to see anybody getting pepper sprayed or in any way, aggressively pinned to the ground and arrested. But unfortunately, that happened. And about 15 people were arrested. We saw multiple people being arrested on camera, very dramatic pictures and video of that. Some were arrested for public order. Some were arrested. Majority were arrested for public order offences. And subsequently, later that night, they all appeared at a special late night sitting in court. So they were all charged and appeared in court. I don't propose to go through all of them, but just to mention that one of the individuals who was arrested and charged is a man named Philip Dwyer. And I mentioned him only because people would know him. He had ran in the European elections, and he calls himself a citizen journalist. And he is often seen at many of these protests and is considered a bit of I suppose he's often been termed a far-right individual. And he was also named in the Dáil in relation to previous protests. So he was an individual who was in court, and all 15 were released on conditional bail, provided they stay away from the area where the protest happened. So on the Malahide Road there in Culock. They also had to agree not to engage in antisocial gatherings or protests, and they're all due in court again in September. and they were released on a bail bond of €300. So sorry, there were 19 people that appeared, and I think a further 6 have appeared since that today.
Mm.
So Philip Dwyer, uh, the judge said he would have to live with the consequences before he was released on conditional bail, including that he stay away from the Crown Paints factory in Coolock. And as I mentioned, there's 18 others, so I'm not going to name them all. But it was a very swift action by An Garda Síochána. These individuals appeared in court that night. And I think, look, we had to be careful. Things are before the courts. It was district court level. I think there was, and I wonder, do you agree with me, a realization that they had to send a message straight away that they were on top of this. And they very much were on Garda Síochána.
Yeah, they could have, because it was throughout the day and the evening, and they could have actually. It's not an arrestable offence. Can they detain them? I think they have to get them to court as quickly as possible. But anyway, I'll put it this way: I was expecting them to appear in court the next day, as others did. So for whatever reason, maybe they did want to send a message out. I was quite surprised that they went to court so quickly. But there is something. I think there's some case law about you can't detain people. For public order, you have to get them to court as quickly as possible. But anyway, look, maybe it's a bit of both. I don't know.
Yeah, but look, those individuals weren't able to protest again in the area. Look, they are alleged to have committed offences. We did see video of people blatantly and openly committing crimes, be it setting fire to the JCB or throwing bricks at Gardaí.
Attacking the Garda cars.
Having got to that, yes, of course the protest then moved to Coolock Garda Station, and we saw horrific footage of people smashing up Garda cars, standing on them, breaking in the windows, blatant criminal damage. And there was, serious concern. There were plenty of guards around at that point in time, but Garda Commissioner was actually present in Coolock Garda Station when this was going on, and some people that were there had said that they were going to do their best to break into the Garda Station. So there were serious security concerns in that moment in time.
Oh, I think there were concerns for the commissioner. I think that's fair because, people were talking about going into the station, because when I was looking at, you could see people were saying, has Culock Garda Station been attacked? That was the first notification I got. I thought, what's this all about? Because it's about a minute by car, but it's a good walk. It's about maybe 10 minutes walk from the Crown Paints, maybe 10, 15 minutes. You have to go down the Malahide Road and then up the right. So that was the first indication I got. So it's fair to say there were concerns for the commissioner and the other guards in that station.
Look, thankfully they got on top of it by the end, and you could see that there were, I suppose you could nearly say, waves of violence. I mean, there was a lot of protest, then peace, then protest again. And I'm using the word protest, I mean violence, because there was peaceful protest as well. So it seemed to happen in waves throughout the day and into the evening. But eventually, obviously, Gardaí got it back under control. The road was reopened. And as you went down to the scene yourself, Mick, again, it kicked off in the afternoon with another protest, but it was nowhere near the level that it was at on Monday, thankfully.
No, yeah, because that was there. You were thinking something might kick off again, and you didn't get any indication. I suppose your spidey senses are there. I did think that about 8 o'clock something. I don't know why, but maybe about 8 o'clock it'll start to sort of kick off, and it happened about 8:30. But it wasn't. It was the guards taking control of the situation. There were people on either side. It's a double dual carriageway, and there's an island in between on the Malahide Road. So on the northbound side, where the Crown Paints place was, there were people on the island, and there were people on the road on the other side of the road. Now, Garda cars were going up. Some people were encroaching on the road, I'll put it that way, and somebody said that they put a TV on the road for a couple of minutes. I didn't see that myself, but the guards did close the bottom of the Malahide. Well, they did close the Malahide Road about 200 yards down at one of the junctions, just before the Odeon, the cinema at the complex across the way, and then it started to build up, and then suddenly, it's amazing where these things happen. We're just sitting there, standing there chatting, and one of them saw them, the public order unit had a lot. They came from nowhere, really. I think they were further up the road. Somebody did say they were further away from the city, out that way. Then they came and they were about, I don't know, maybe about 40, and they just moved down. But you could see it was very, very efficient. They knew what they were doing and they had a plan. And it, from the Garda perspective, it clearly worked, because within half an hour, they pushed all the protesters away. They corralled some down side streets, but they had controlled that road, and the road was open.
It was very clear from observing it, and I'm sure you would agree, that they had a plan. They had a plan for this exact scenario. Once it kicked in, I mean, once they got the resources there, they certainly enacted a policing plan that we hadn't maybe seen at the Dublin riots. But let me ask you, do you think now, having seen the scenes that you saw on Monday, have they learned? Have they learned from the Dublin riots? Was it a more effective policing of the situation on Monday?
The Dublin riots was difficult because it was all over North Inner City Dublin. And do you remember the pictures of the guards, the poor Garda sergeant being assaulted on O'Connell Bridge? Yeah. And you had people being stored. So it was. I think it is chaotic. It was.
There were multiple scenes. Yeah.
Yeah, and even when the mob stormed the cordon, where at the attack, where the poor wee kids were attacked, and their school assistant at the school at Parnell Square. So it was very difficult for Garda to react to that. But look, guards do public order training all the time. I was up at Gormanston in County Meath, the Defence Forces camp. That's where they do their public order training. It is very impressive. So, and it's perhaps in a way this was easier because there was one location. But look, there's no doubt you can't beat City Hall. Once the Garda authorities say we're doing this, you can't beat them. That's it.
Once that happened, I would say, just going back to what the events that happened in the morning, I know for a fact that members of An Garda Síochána were, the small number that were there, were in fear for their safety and did wonder where they're going to get the backup that they were calling for. It took, unfortunately, for things to really escalate, for people to break into the site and set fire to a JCB for this action plan, which clearly was very effective once it kicked in, to kick in. But there was a period of time there where thankfully, no member of An Garda Síochána was seriously hurt, but it was hairy there for a couple of hours in the morning anyway.
But you raised the point, the guards, I'm not saying they're in an impossible position, but they do facilitate protest, and they facilitated the protest all day on Tuesday. But then they went, okay, for the public good, the greater good, we are clearing this road. And you're right, they did have a plan, and they enacted that plan very smoothly and very competently, and it was all over in 25 minutes. Yeah, the road was open again. So look, the guards do have plans and they enact them, but I think the difficulty is they always try to make it a last resort. You remember during COVID, it was the 4 E's, engagement and all that. They work their way up, they ratchet up if they have to. I think that's what they're doing here. But then maybe the guards will have to go, right, as soon as anything starts, we're going in. I don't know. That probably goes against their ethos, because they do facilitate protests. They do. I think
they want this to be a last resort, to have to go in and bring the public order in the way that they did. Sadly, I don't think this is the last time we're going to see this. It's becoming a more common thing with the rise of. I hate calling them the far right, because I think it's a way of explaining, I suppose, a certain cohort of people. But we saw an awful lot of very young thugs, really, who were committing some of the more serious crimes, smashing up the Garda cars and setting fire to the JCB. I wonder, do those people really have an ideology, or is their ideology similar to the people who broke into all the shops during the Dublin riots, literally just to commit crime in an opportunistic way?
Well, I'll put it this way. The Irish Times had a story Wednesday morning to the effect that there are 30 sites that have now been earmarked for iPass centres. I can guarantee you every one of those will be protested at.
Yeah.
And I'd keep an eye on Thornton Hall. Do you remember a story I did last week that the guards they had an intelligence and they did a search of the area around the entrance to Thornton Hall, and they found a knife, they found a corn saw, they found a hatchet or an axe, and they found various poles and everything just in the undergrowth, shall we say. So Thornton Hall is one to watch, but I think every one of those other 30 iPass or putative iPass sites will also be the scene of protests like this. There's no escaping that because that's what's going to happen.
Yeah, sadly, I mean, we're living in a new reality now, and there is certainly, again, a small cohort of people that, but they are dangerous, who can cause serious trouble, and they are unfortunately are able to organize very efficiently through social media. And probably this is a good segue to talk about the events of today. For example, the story that's now broken about threats to Deputy Mary Lou McDonald, the leader of the Sinn Fein party. So an individual crackpot, I would say, but it has to be taken seriously, has took to social media wearing I hesitate to call it a balaclava, a makeshift balaclava.
The worst balaclava in history.
But nonetheless, some of the things that he said were very disturbing and sinister and have to be, I think, taken very seriously, especially in light of recent world events. And he is threatening in that video the life of Mary Lou McDonald and the Garda Commissioner.
Okay, and Deputy McDonald has made a complaint to the Garda Síochána, so there's going to be there is a criminal investigation into that.
There is now.
Do you think that some people really simply believe that online doesn't count? In other words, if you have bucketheads saying, I'm going to kill Mary Lou McDonald, or Drew Harris deserves to be shot, or anybody, that they think it's sort of, that's not real life.
Yeah, I think they do. I mean, I suppose it's hard to know this man's exact thought process, but it isn't difficult to figure out who he is. I was able to find out within 2 minutes exactly who this person is and see his real face. And, I look, I have to be careful. People haven't been charged with anything, but he posted videos on a public profile with this balaclava on, whereas you look further down the profile and you can see his face, no problem. So, yeah, I think he at least thought there'd be no consequences to saying this, that it wouldn't be taken seriously. But I think in light of the protests the last number of days and the actions of particular members of, again, call them the far right, Gardaí have to take this extremely seriously. This guy committed 2 verifiable offences in this video, in my opinion. He threatened to kill Mary Lou McDonald. He said that he would shoot her himself, and he also threatened the life of Garda Commissioner Drew Harris, saying that someone should cut his throat. I think this guy will be expecting a knock, or maybe he wasn't expecting it, but he'll definitely get a knock on the door now from Gardaí.
This fella's in the shit. There's absolutely no doubt about that. And he can try and laugh it off, but the guards will come knocking for that fella. There's no doubt about that.
Mm-hmm. I will say I was a little bit frustrated at first because I thought we'd moved on from the days of getting the standard press office line of we don't comment on third party material. Unfortunately, we brought this to the Garda press office's attention at first. That's the line we got from Garda Síochána, that they don't comment on third party material that can't be verified. I think everybody had seen the video on social media. Anyone that went looking for it could easily be verified. But it was only when...
Sorry, and then Deputy McDonald issued a statement on Twitter, effectively.
Yeah. And this is what frustrates me about this country, is we're so reactionary, only really we respond when really we're put under pressure to do so. And obviously when Deputy McDonald, we sought her out for comment, and I'm sure other journalists did. She issued a statement saying that it's been a threat to her life. She'd taken it seriously, and she had then made a formal complaint to Gardaí. Now Gardaí have confirmed an official investigation into the video. As I said, it won't take a detective to figure out who this guy is. We understand he is well known to Gardaí. He has been before the courts in relation to firearms offences. So, yeah, it will be taken seriously, I'm sure. And maybe even by the time this podcast is out, there'll be a development.
I'd be amazed if it wasn't in the next couple of days, because, he has hoisted himself with his own petard, really. And so when he can't laugh it off, and he can't think it's only Twitter and it's only online and it's only TikTok and it doesn't really matter, he's going to find it very quickly that it matters.
And I mean, there's possible incitement to hatred there as well, because he is calling on other people to attack the Garda Commissioner, and there possibly are people out there who might take that seriously. There are now serious individuals who are willing to do harm to politicians, or at least say they will online. And I note even the Garda Commissioner said after the protests in Culock, that there is a possibility that they will be looking at individuals for incitement to hatred and violence in relation to the protests. So this is an offence that Gardaí are starting to take more serious. So words matter as well. I mean, this individual might turn around and say, I was only saying something online. That doesn't wash anymore. I mean, politicians are under serious threat. Good segue to talk about your next story.
Yeah. So this is something we've been looking at for a while. Over the last few days, I got information just to explain. There are 15 members of the cabinet, and they all have what's called a protection officer. We and I would probably call them a Garda driver. He or she is armed with a semi-automatic pistol. So they act as a driver and they act as a bodyguard. Well, what we established in recent days is that, and I think it's fair, guards will say things are constantly under review, and they are under constant review. And I understand there is a review process underway at the minute. And international best practice would be, really, you should have two protection officers. One is a driver and one is a full-time bodyguard, but they're both armed guards if it hits the fan. They train in that way and stuff. So my understanding is there is a review underway, and the likely upshot of that is that most, if not all, of the cabinet will now get two armed detectives to be their full-time protection officers. So that's doubling up, really. Now that's an indication of best international practice, but also it's an indication that Gardaí believe there are more threats out there to cabinet members. If you look at what happened to the new Green Party leader, Roderick O'Gorman, people going to his house, if it hits the fan, and even though they're armed, is one armed detective really enough, really, to deal with any issues? Maybe two would be better to tic-tac with each other and, form tactical units and all that sort of stuff. So I think that is what is going to happen. But it is, just speaking to politicians and security sources over the last couple of months, they all are becoming increasingly, it's like a staircase. You go from one step all the way up, and they're definitely much more worried about attacks and the way politicians are treated in this country. Mm-hmm. And I worry, and I know they worry, that particularly about a lone wolf. In other words, one person does it off their own bat and commits a serious offence against the politician. And that's a serious concern at the minute.
Yeah, and off the back of doing a bit of investigating on that, you were able to find out from your sources that there was a very serious and credible threat against the former Taoiseach Leo Varadkar.
Yes, so just to explain, all the cabinet ministers have the driver, as I said, but when you're the Taoiseach, you have a protection team. It's more. I'm not going to say how many, but there are several Gardaí armed detectives there who are there to protect the Taoiseach. So Leo Varadkar had that when he was Taoiseach. Then when the power sharing deal with Fianna Fáil came in after a certain time, he went to be Taoiseach, he rotated it so that Micheál Martin became Taoiseach. So he got the armed protection team. Leo Varadkar got the driver, the protection officer, the one armed guard. Early 2022, that was the protection team was reinstated. So the Taoiseach had the protection team and the Taoiseach had the protection team. And I was always wondering about that. And essentially what we discovered was that was reinstated because the guards had a significant threat against the then Taoiseach. He became Taoiseach at the end of 2022. And my investigations established that there was a right-wing plot to shoot Leo Varadkar. It involved a former member of a foreign military source, and they were trying to procure weapons. Now, there were no arrests. It's an intelligence-led operation, and intelligence is a murky world. But what was explained to me is once these people realised that the Taoiseach had extra protection around him, the plot dissipated. But it was significant enough for the Taoiseach to be briefed about this former foreign soldier who was out to kill him. I know definitively he was briefed about that person, and it happened around the same time that he was given the extra security. So the way it was explained to me, it was advanced and it was very, very dangerous.
That's very scary. He had, just to explain, I think you might have already said, but just to explain to people, when he was Taoiseach, he had a certain level of protection. And then when he was Taoiseach, he lost a certain level of protection. But obviously off the back of that threat, then they assessed that he needed more full-time protection. Is that right?
Yes, yes. And even at the end of 2022, we did a story about what's called a post. So he lives in South Central Dublin. It would be Kevin Street Garda Station. They had to put officers outside the house permanently during this threat. So look, I was listening to Leo Varadkar, who was on today with Claire Byrne earlier, and he said, I didn't really want to know about these threats. He asked the guards, the security apparatus of the state, to just don't tell me about them. I don't want to know. So you can imagine the threshold it was for them to tell him about this man.
Yeah.
And various sources have confirmed that to me, that he was specifically briefed about that man. So there was a risk to him.
I feel, because I know people have the question, we should maybe explain why, obviously it's a very serious threat and Gardaí took it seriously, but why maybe that individual was not arrested.
But look, it's not as if when we carry out investigations like this, the Garda press office rings you up and gives you every detail you want. You're up against, the guards declined to comment when I was talking to them, so we had to do digging. You only get a certain amount of information, but no, people weren't arrested because it was an intelligence-led operation. And for who knows, maybe they were out of the country at the time or whatever. There's no point in me saying I know when I don't. They weren't arrested. The guards were aware of the plot and they took action to protect the Taoiseach as a result of this plot. And it was very serious.
And, guards sometimes carry out intelligence operations. It doesn't always necessarily result in an arrest or a charge, but they obviously took the actions they needed to take in the moment to protect the then Taoiseach.
Intelligence operations happen all the time, and we very, very rarely get to hear about them. It's unheard of to hear about an operation like this to protect the Taoiseach. So that's it.
You have to wonder, did that weigh on his decision, obviously to get out of politics in the way that he has? I mean, I know people talked about threats to him, but that's a very serious thing for anybody to take home, to know that there is somebody out there who seriously wants to do you harm. I wonder, did that weigh on his decision? We won't know.
We don't know, because does he even know? But I'm sure subconsciously he's going, "Oh, Jesus Christ, is this worth it?
Is it worth it?
What I mean?
Yeah.
Is it really?
No, I mean, we live in very scary times. I mean, obviously, look, what happened with Donald Trump in America is very scary, but it's a totally different country over there, and there have been assassination attempts in the past. But again, that's a lone wolf situation where it appears, we don't know all the facts yet, but it appears that person just took it upon themselves. And I suppose the fear is now that something like that could happen over here. Look, thankfully, we don't have people that have access to firearms like that.
But I will say,
the threat's there.
America is a totally different country, but England is a different country, but it's pretty close to Ireland, and it happened there twice.
It did.
So I just sometimes think that people think, it'll never happen in Ireland. And we'll wake up one day and it has happened. I think we shouldn't be complacent about this. Politicians, talk to any politician, they'll talk about the level of abuse has ramped up significantly. And they do worry about lone wolves. There's no doubt about that. Talk to any politician, talk to any government.
I was concerned, in watching some of the live streams of the protests on Monday and listening to some of the language, some of the things that were being said were very disturbing. I mean, some people have really gone down a believe things and believe in conspiracy theories that are hard for you and I and most people to understand. But those people have been influenced by social media and have really gone down to a very dark place. I mean, I heard somebody, I won't identify them, but they were standing at the front of this protest and they were watching kids, and they were kids throwing fireworks and glass bottles at the Gardaí. And instead of being a responsible adult, and this person was of a mature age, shall we say, instead of saying, lads, don't do that, or discouraging children, he was encouraging them and saying, fuck them, they're scumbags. We've no time for guards. And the kind of language and attitude that he had about Gardaí, he's passing that on to another generation. So there is a very, very scary cohort of people out there who have, it seems, real hatred for members of the government and for Gardaí and even for journalists.
And for, they seem to have a particular hatred as well for Sinn Fein.
Yeah.
They're
not escaping this either. Yeah.
No, it's not as if they're the opposition and we're on their side. Do you think it's going to get worse? I don't think it's going to get any better.
I think this is our norm. This is our new norm. I hate using that phrase, but I think, yeah, we're going to, as you've mentioned, there are going to be multiple more protests at all these iPass centres. Local people have a right to be concerned and to express their concerns and have peaceful protests. But again, there's a cohort of people that are co-opting, that are coming from all over the country and getting involved and sparking up inciting hatred and violence. I don't think that's reflective of the majority of people. And even the majority of people that are actually protesting don't want to cause violence, I don't think. But sadly, they're all getting tarnished with one brush because of the actions of thugs, really, and some of these, I suppose, far-right influencers, if you want to call them that.
I think one thing's for sure, this is not the last time we'll be talking about safety of politicians or riots or serious public disorder.
No, it's a very disturbing time. So we'll leave it there on that depressing note. Thanks as always to everyone that listens to us, and even to the gentleman that came up to Mick and scared the life out of him, but ultimately was a listener. So
it's nice to hear it. It is really nice. You get it, Paul. It is really nice to hear people saying, "We like your pod."
Yeah. So look, we'll be back next week. Thanks for listening.
Thanks very much.